Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. My name is Hannah, and this is the story of how 1 month in the Maldives changed my life forever. It all started when my husband, Ryan, decided that we needed a vacation. We had been under a lot of stress lately. Ryan, a 38-year-old marketing executive, had just been promoted at his firm, which meant more responsibilities and even less time for us. I, at 36, was working as a graphic designer from home and feeling increasingly isolated and neglected. When Ryan suggested a month-long getaway to the Maldives, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to reconnect. What I didn't expect was that Ryan would decide to invite my stepfather, Ethan, and his mother, Diane. "It'll be fun," Ryan said. "Besides, your mum can't travel because of her arthritis, and Ethan needs a break from taking care of her." I nodded reluctantly, not knowing that this decision would change the course of all our lives. We arrived in the Maldives on a sweltering July day. The resort was picture perfect: crystal clear water, white sandy beaches, and luxurious overwater bungalows. It was everything you'd expect from a tropical paradise. However, the reality didn't quite match the fantasy. Ryan, despite being on vacation, spent most of his time glued to his phone and laptop, taking calls, handling emails, and managing urgent business matters. "Sorry, babe," he would say, flashing a guilty smile. "This project is huge for the company." I would nod, swallowing my disappointment. Meanwhile, Diane, Ryan's 65-year-old mother, decided she didn't enjoy the tropical heat and spent most of her days indoors with the air conditioning, watching television and ordering room service. Before long, I found myself spending more time with Ethan, my 55-year-old stepfather, who worked as a retired history professor. At first, it was just casual walks on the beach or friendly conversations over breakfast, but soon those simple moments became the highlight of my day. Ethan was different. Despite his age, he had a lively curiosity and enthusiasm for life that sharply contrasted with Ryan's distracted, work-obsessed behavior. Ethan would tell me about his travels, his passion for art and history, and the lectures he used to give. Without realizing it, I began to open up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. One evening, after yet another day of Ryan being absorbed in his work, Ethan and I went for a long walk along the beach under the starry sky. As we walked, Ethan suddenly stopped and turned to me, looking deep into my eyes. "Hannah," he said quietly, "are you happy?" The question hit me like a wave. Was I happy? It had been so long since I had even asked myself that question. "I don't know," I replied honestly. Ethan gently took my hand, a gesture that should have sent alarms ringing in my head, but instead it felt comforting. "Life's too short to be unhappy," he said softly. "Ever since your mom got sick, I've realized how fragile everything is. We can't take happiness for granted." His words struck a chord deep inside me, stirring feelings I had buried for years. In the glow of the moonlight, I saw Ethan not as my mother's husband, but as a man. A kind, caring, and charismatic man. The next few days were a blur of emotions I couldn't control. Every time Ryan excused himself to take yet another business call, I found myself instinctively seeking out Ethan's company. We explored the island together, swam in the clear blue waters, and shared laughter over casual lunches. One afternoon, while Ryan was locked in a video conference and Diane was napping in her air-conditioned room, Ethan and I decided to explore a more secluded part of the island. We wandered for about an hour, away from the tourist paths, until we stumbled upon a hidden beach framed by lush greenery and towering rocks. The place felt timeless, untouched by the world around it. Ethan laid out a towel on the sand, and we sat side by side gazing out at the endless horizon. The sea breeze brushed our faces, and the gentle rhythm of the waves filled the silence. "You know, Hannah," Ethan began, his voice soft and thoughtful. "Ever since we arrived, it feels like I've been getting to know you all over again. It's like I never really saw you before." His words made my heart skip a beat. "I feel the same way," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "With you, I feel seen, appreciated. It's something I've been missing for a long time. Ethan moved closer to me, his hand brushing lightly against mine on the sand. I know this is wrong, he said, his voice full of conflict. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it. These past few days with you have been the happiest I've had in years. I knew I should say something, stop him, tell him it was wrong, but I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning toward him, my body betraying my mind. Our lips met in a kiss that started hesitantly but quickly grew more intense, more urgent. Years of loneliness and isolation melted away in that moment. Ethan's hands explored my body with a tenderness and longing that made me tremble. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying Ryan, my mother, and everything I believed in. But at that moment, none of it seemed to matter. There was only Ethan and me, and the overwhelming desire that had been building between us for days. We made love on that secluded beach as the setting sun cast its golden light over the waves, the only witness to our transgression. It was passionate, raw, and liberating in a way I had never experienced before. When it was over, we lay in silence, our bodies tangled together, listening to the waves as they lapped gently at the shore. But the weight of guilt didn't take long to set in. As the reality of what we had done began to sink in, I felt a crushing sense of shame. How could I have done this? How could I have betrayed Ryan and my mother? Yet despite the guilt, I couldn't deny the truth. I wanted more. Ethan had awakened something in me, something I had thought long dead. The days that followed were filled with a confusing mix of guilt and desire. During the day, I played the part of the devoted wife, smiling at Ryan when he joined us for meals and making small talk with Diane. But at night, when everyone retired to their rooms, I would sneak away to meet Ethan on our secret beach. Every evening felt like an escape into another world, one where we were free to indulge in our passion, unburdened by the realities waiting back at the resort. Ethan made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. He cherished every moment with me, and I found myself getting lost in his touch, in the way he looked at me. In his arms, I could forget about everything else, my marriage, my responsibilities, my guilt. But it was always there, waiting to hit me like a tidal wave when I returned to my room at night and saw Ryan sleeping peacefully, unaware of my betrayal. Each morning I promised myself that this would be the last time, that I would end things with Ethan before it got out of control. But every night when Ethan looked at me with those longing eyes, my resolve melted away. A week before our trip was supposed to end, Ryan made an announcement over breakfast that sent my heart racing. "My project is wrapping up," he said, smiling at me across the table. "Finally, I'll be able to spend more time with you for the rest of our vacation." I should have been thrilled, but instead I felt a wave of panic wash over me. How could I go on acting normally around Ryan after everything that had happened with Ethan? That evening, when I met Ethan on the beach, I told him about Ryan's news. Maybe this is a sign," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe we need to stop before things get worse." Ethan's face softened, a mixture of sadness and understanding filling his eyes. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "But Hannah, these days with you have been the best I've had in years. I don't want it to end." We kissed that night with an intensity that bordered on desperation, knowing that our time together was quickly running out. Our lovemaking felt more urgent than ever, as if we were trying to hold on to every last moment before it all slipped away. The following days were torture. True to his word, Ryan started spending more time with me, taking us on excursions and planning romantic dinners. I forced myself to smile and act happy, but inside, I felt torn apart. Every time Ryan touched me, I thought of Ethan's hands. Every time he kissed me, I remembered the fiery passion Ethan and I shared. Ethan and I continued to meet in secret, but our encounters were tinged with a sense of impending loss. We both knew this couldn't last. Our time together had been a dream, but we were about to wake up. The night before our departure, we decided to meet one final time on our beach. Ryan had mentioned that he had a last-minute video conference that evening, so I assumed we had enough time to say our goodbyes. I arrived at the beach first, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and longing. Ethan arrived shortly after, his face reflecting the same conflicted emotions. We embraced without words, letting the silence between us speak for everything we couldn't say. "I'm going to miss you," I whispered against his chest. "And I'll miss you," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Hannah, I know this can't continue, but I want you to know that these past few weeks have meant more to me than anything." We kissed then, a deep, lingering kiss that tasted of finality and heartbreak. Ethan's hands moved over my body with a tenderness and familiarity that made my heart ache. Slowly, as the night enveloped us, our clothes fell away, and we came together one last time under the stars. It was bittersweet, knowing this was the end. We were so wrapped up in our moment that we didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. A voice, one I knew all too well, cut through the stillness of the night. "Well, well, what do we have here?" My heart stopped. Standing just a few feet away was Ryan. His expression was unreadable in the dim light, but there was something chilling in the calmness of his voice. Ethan and I scrambled to cover ourselves, panic and shame crashing over me like a wave. This was the moment I had dreaded, the moment when everything would unravel. "Ryan, we," I stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. To my surprise, Ryan didn't yell or rage. He didn't even seem angry. Instead, he took a step closer, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "You know," he said slowly, "I always suspected something like this might happen. Ethan's a good-looking guy, and I've been distracted, haven't I?" I was speechless. Was Ryan understanding? "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this to happen. Ryan held up his hand, silencing me. "Don't apologize, Hannah. In fact, I think this could be interesting." I blinked, unsure if I was hearing him correctly. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his voice strained with tension. Ryan stepped even closer, his eyes gleaming with an intensity I had never seen before. "I mean," he said carefully, "maybe we could share." I stared at him in shock. Was Ryan really suggesting what I thought he was? "Ryan, I don't understand," I said, my voice shaky and confused. He reached out, brushing my cheek with a tenderness that was at odds with the surreal situation we were in. "Hannah, I love you. And if this is what makes you happy, then I want to be a part of it." What happened next felt like a fever dream. Ryan joined us, his hands gently exploring my body alongside Ethan's. What had begun as a betrayal transformed into something altogether different, something beyond any label or convention. That night, the three of us gave in to unrestrained passion. It was strange, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Ryan's hands intertwined with Ethan's, their touch igniting sensations I had never felt before. When it was over, the three of us lay together on the sand, our bodies tangled as we listened to the soft rhythm of the waves. No one spoke for a long time, perhaps afraid to break the spell that had fallen over us. Finally, Ryan was the first to break the silence. "This changes things, doesn't it?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the sea's murmur. Ethan nodded slowly. "I suppose it does," he replied, his tone thoughtful, but with a hint of uncertainty. "But what does it really mean for us?" I stayed silent, my mind swirling with 100 different emotions: guilt, confusion, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. What had just happened? And what did it mean for our future? Ryan's voice cut through the haze of my thoughts. "It means," he said after a long pause, "that we have a lot to talk about when we get home." The trip back was surreal. On the plane, the three of us pretended like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. We chatted about the weather and shared memories from the Maldives, as though we were just an ordinary family. Diane, blissfully unaware of everything, talked endlessly about how much she had enjoyed the air conditioning in her room. But once we were back home, the weight of what had happened settled over us like a thick fog. Ryan, Ethan, and I met privately to discuss what this meant for the future. I can't deny what happened was intense, Ryan began, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. But we need to think about what this means long term. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. I agree. What we shared was extraordinary, but how does this impact our day-to-day lives? And what about the rest of the family? I sat in silence, feeling overwhelmed. The experience we'd had on the beach was undeniably powerful. It had opened up a part of me I hadn't realized existed, but was it something we could sustain? And at what cost? Maybe we should take things slow, Ryan suggested after a moment of thought. See how this works for us without jumping to any conclusions. Explore it, but with clear boundaries. Ryan's suggestion took me by surprise. He had never been particularly adventurous in terms of our relationship, and now he was proposing something that challenged all conventional norms. Are you sure you're okay with this, Ryan? I asked, my voice trembling. I don't want you to do anything you're not comfortable with just to keep me happy. Ryan took my hand in his gaze steady. Hannah, I love you. And if this is something that makes you happy, something that makes all of us happy, then I want to give it a chance. Besides, he added with a wry smile, I have to admit, what happened on the beach was exciting. Ethan, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. If we're going to explore this, we need to set rules, boundaries, and most importantly, we need complete honesty with each other. And so we began our new life together, something none of us could have predicted. We established ground rules, complete transparency, no secrets, and if anyone felt uncomfortable, everything would stop immediately. Nothing would happen without the full consent of everyone involved. The first few months were a whirlwind of emotions. There were nights of intense passion, where the three of us explored new depths of intimacy and connection. But there were also moments of doubt, jealousy, and confusion. Sometimes I questioned whether we were doing the right thing. Ryan, to my surprise, adjusted remarkably well. Seeing me with Ethan seemed to ignite a fire in him, something I hadn't seen in years. Our marriage grew stronger in ways I hadn't expected. We began to communicate more openly and rediscover each other as partners, not just as husband and wife. Ethan, however, struggled with guilt. Being involved with me, his stepdaughter, weighed heavily on him, especially given the deep respect he still had for my mother, Diane. Although she remained oblivious to what was happening, Ethan often expressed remorse during our private moments. What would your mother think if she knew? He would ask, guilt seeping into his voice during our late-night conversations. As for me, I was constantly wrestling with my emotions. I loved Ryan. He had been my partner for over a decade, but what I felt for Ethan was entirely different. It was intense, passionate, and thrilling in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about love. Could I truly love two men at the same time? And if so, was it sustainable in the long run? Over time, our dynamics settled into something resembling stability. We learned to talk about our fears, our desires, and our boundaries. Communication became the glue that held our unconventional relationship together, but it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when jealousy reared its ugly head. Ryan sometimes felt left out when Ethan and I reminisced about our time in the Maldives, and Ethan occasionally felt like an outsider in our marriage. About a year after our return from the Maldives, we encountered our first real crisis. My mother, whose health had been improving, expressed a desire to come live with us for a while. The idea of her moving in sent all three of us into a spiral of panic. How could we possibly keep our relationship a secret with her living under the same roof? We spent countless nights debating what to do. Could we continue this secret life while she was there, or did we have to end it? The thought of letting go of what we had built was painful, but the idea of hurting my mother was unbearable. In the end, we made the difficult decision to pause our unconventional relationship while my mother stayed with us. It was heartbreaking, but we knew it was the right thing to do. The months that followed were some of the hardest we had ever faced. Trying to return to a normal dynamic after everything we had experienced felt nearly impossible. Ryan and I had to pretend that everything was just as it had always been, while Ethan returned to his role as the attentive, caring stepfather. The tension between us, however, was palpable. There were stolen glances, accidental touches, and moments of unspoken desire that simmered beneath the surface, threatening to spill over at any time. My mother, completely unaware, often commented on how wonderful it was to see us all getting along so well. Little did she know the complicated web of emotions and connections that lay just beneath the surface. When my mother finally moved back to her own home after 3 months, the three of us were faced with a difficult question. Would we pick up where we left off? Or was it better to let things stay in the past? The silence between us was thick, heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. It was Ethan who finally broke the tension. "I love you both," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But maybe this was a sign. Maybe it's time to appreciate what we had and move on." His words hit me hard, but deep down, I knew he was right. I looked at Ryan, searching for his reaction. To my surprise, there were tears in his eyes. "Part of me wants to move on too," Ryan admitted, his voice shaky. "These months without it have been a relief. But another part of me wonders if we were on to something real, something that worked for us, even if it wasn't conventional. What happens when we get older? When we have kids? What if society can't accept what we are?" I sat in silence, my heart aching. I loved both men in different ways. The thought of losing either of them or having to choose between them was unbearable. "Maybe," I whispered, "maybe we should try one more time, one more night together, the three of us. And then we'll decide." Ryan and Ethan exchanged a long, meaningful look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, they both nodded. That night, we came together again with an intensity that I hadn't felt in months. There was an unspoken understanding that this could be the last time, and we made every moment count. Each touch, each kiss, was filled with emotion. It was passionate, raw, and overwhelming, as if we were trying to hold on to each other for as long as we could. When the dawn broke, we lay there in silence, our bodies intertwined, as the weight of what was coming next settled over us. "I love you both," I said quietly, breaking the stillness. "But I think Ethan is right. This was beautiful while it lasted, but it can't continue." Ryan pulled me close, pressing his lips to my forehead. "I agree," he murmured, "but this doesn't change how I feel about you, Hannah. I'll always love you." Ethan sat up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you too," he said softly, "and I'll always treasure what we had. But it's time to go back to who we were before. Me as your stepfather, and you two as husband and wife." And so, with heavy hearts but a sense of peace, we brought our year-long affair to an end. The months that followed were difficult, filled with bittersweet memories and moments of nostalgia that threatened to overwhelm us. But little by little, we found a new balance. Ryan and I focused on rebuilding our marriage, rediscovering parts of our relationship that had been buried beneath the weight of our complicated emotions. We communicated more openly than ever before, and our bond grew stronger as we worked through the challenges. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself into caring for my mother, whose health had improved significantly. He remained an important part of our lives, but now as a stepfather and close family friend, rather than the lover he had once been. Today, years after that fateful month in the Maldives, I look back with a mixture of gratitude and reflection. What we experienced was intense, transformative, and deeply personal. It taught us lessons about love, desire, and the human heart's capacity to connect in unexpected ways. Do I regret ending our unconventional relationship? Sometimes, a part of me still wonders, what if? But I also know that some experiences are beautiful precisely because they are fleeting. Ryan and I are still together, and our love is stronger for having weathered the storm of what we went through. Ethan remains a cherished part of our family, a confidant, and someone I will always care for deeply. As for me, I'm a changed woman. I've learned that love can take many forms, that passion doesn't always fit within societal conventions, and that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. And now I'm sharing my story with you. I'm not looking for judgment or approval, only reflection. We all face choices in life, some harder than others. And to you, dear reader, I ask, what would you have done in my place? Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.